Hi, everyone. We're going to let people filter in. I think it's just for one. I see people still sort of appearing on the participant panel here. I'll give folks a few more seconds and then I'll kick things off. But for now, welcome. All right, we've cracked 100, so I think maybe I'll get things started, get us to the main event. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our book talk today. I'm Adrian Daub, and I'm the faculty director of the Clayman Institute for Gender Research, and we're absolutely delighted to be here today to celebrate the recent release of The Trouble with Passion, How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality by Erin, Cech, who is our guest today. Erin's book probes the ominous side of career advice to follow your passion. And it's a data-driven study that explains how the passion principle fails us and perpetuates inequality in terms of class, gender, and race. And it suggests how we can reconfigure our relationships to paid work. If I may be permitted the joke, I'm very passionate about this book. And I suppose that also means that I'm troubled by just how passionate I got in reading this book. I'm sure you will find it just as stimulating and as exciting as I did. If you're interested in getting your own copy of the book, please check out the chat for a link by which you can purchase it. That should be up there now. Yep, there it is. So thank you all for joining us here today. Please note that this talk is being live captioned. And I will just briefly introduce the Clayman Institute in case some of you are new to us and to our events, and then hand it over to our interlocutor and moderator today, Monique Harrison. So a little bit about the Clayman Institute. Since 1974, the Institute has conducted research around topics related to feminism, gender, race, and sexuality, has brought together communities of interdisciplinary scholars, and has endeavored to translate gender research for broad audiences. The Institute acts as an incubator for collaboration, engaging diverse groups of experts and scholars to identify and tackle the next big questions related to gender equality. For decades, its groundbreaking research, both its in-house research and the interdisciplinary gender research it funds, has effected lasting change. So it's my honor in that spirit today to introduce our two speakers. As I mentioned, we are celebrating the latest work by Dr. Erin Cech. Erin is a professor and author, as well as a former postdoctoral fellow and longtime friend of the Clayman Institute. You'll hear more about Erin's background in just a bit. We're thrilled to have her here in conversation with someone who we know very well, Dr. Monique Harrison, a former Clayman Institute graduate dissertation fellow. And I'm happy to take a moment at first to congratulate her on defending her dissertation just last week. So congratulations, Dr. Harrison. Must feel good to hear that, to hear those two words together. I remember that being kind of a big feeling. We certainly know how much work goes into finishing up a dissertation and starting a postdoc soon. So congrats on that as well. So we're super thankful that in the middle of many transitions and accomplishments, you are taking out time out of your schedule to be with us here today and moderating this book talk here today. So thank you. I'll say a few things about Monique's background. Monique is, as I mentioned, an incoming postdoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education in the Education Policy Division. Her work currently follows a cohort of undergraduates to understand how gender, race, and socioeconomic status influence academic predilections and course choices. During her time at Stanford, in addition to being a graduate dissertation fellow here at Clayman, she was also the lab manager for the Pathways Research Lab. She has earned degrees in sociology of education at Stanford, sociology, also Stanford, education, Harvard, and human development at Cornell. With that, let's get the conversation started. Just a quick note that if you have questions for the speakers during the talk or the Q&A, you may enter them into the Q&A section of the Zoom. Don't try to use the chat. I do not think it will work for you. And there is plenty of time for an audience Q&A at the end. I just hope you'll be okay if Monique or Erin decide to collate questions. If the conversation gets very, very active and very engaged, that can sometimes happen. I hope it's okay for all of you. But for now, Monique, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Erin, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us for our discussion today. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Adrian. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Erin Cech. She's an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and by courtesy in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan. She was a postdoctoral fellow at the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford, and she earned her PhD in sociology from UC San Diego and her undergraduate degrees in electrical engineering and sociology from Montana State University. Professor Cech's research examines the cultural mechanisms of inequality reproduction, especially through seemingly innocuous cultural beliefs and practices. So Professor Cech's work is funded by multiple grants from the National Science Foundation, and her research has appeared in the American Sociological Review, American Journal of Sociology, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and her research has been covered by the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Time, and the news sections of Science and Nature. In 2020, she was named one of Business Equality Magazine's 40 LGBTQ+ leaders under 40. And the book we are all gathered to learn more about, The Trouble with Passion, How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality, was published in 2021. And if you're inspired here today, her second book, Misconceiving Merit, Paradoxes of Excellence and Devotion in Academic Science and Engineering with Mary Blair Loy, came out last month. So I will now hand it off to Professor Erin Cech.
Thank you so much, Monique, for that wonderful introduction. Dr. Harrison, I should say, congratulations again. Thank you to Adrian for the introduction, and thank you to Clayman for the invitation to be back here. Clayman is a second intellectual home for me, and as I've said many, many times, there's no other place that I have found more nurturance of creativity and innovation and sort of wild hair thoughts than my time at Clayman and my interaction with it. So it's really delighted to be back in this space. I'm going to share my screen and get us started. Let's see. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my book, The Trouble with Passion. And as these sort of book presentations go, there's no one way to get all the juicy details in one talk. So I'm going to touch on some of the things that I think might be sort of generally interesting to a wider audience. And I welcome your questions, both sort of about the argument or data or sort of the implications of this for our lives more broadly in the Q&A. Let me begin with a quote from something that's a little close to home for those of you at Stanford, a quote from the illustrious Steve Jobs. So Jobs was giving the commencement address to the 2005 graduating class at Stanford University, and he gave these bright, shiny new graduates the following advice. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know it when you find it. These narratives that Job is giving about what good work means in relationship with good lives is really at the centerpiece of what I'm interested in with this book. But he also highlights a core paradox at the center of this book, that one of the best capitalists of the last half century is imploring us not to settle for work that is anything than what we love. So let me talk a little bit about this paradox. On the one hand, workers in a capitalist labor force are generally expected to do what our employers tell us to do, regardless of our personal desires and interests and perspectives. There is an increasing demand for overwork, especially among the white-collar labor force, and we are expected to be devoted to our work and always on to our employers. On the other hand, there is a ubiquitous cultural expectation for individualism and self-expression in most post-industrial societies. The individual has become the master human identity, and in an increasingly widespread array of social arenas, including our jobs, we expect and are expected to express our senses of individuality. So this sets up a paradox between the structural demands and requirements of the capitalist workforce and this cultural expectation for self-expression. How do career aspirants and workers define good work and good career decision-making in this context? How does that shape how they think about good lives? And importantly, for a sociologist like me, how might those beliefs contribute to social inequalities? So what I argue in my book, and what I'll touch on today, is that what I call the passion principle is a predominant guiding principle for good career decision-making in many post-industrial societies for the college educated, but often beyond. I argue that there are several ways that although the passion principle can seem beneficial at the individual level, by helping people to kind of foster a sense of fulfillment in a labor force that might otherwise seem estranging, it can help reproduce inequality in a variety of ways in the labor force. And I'll touch on a couple of ways in depth. I'll talk about how it can perpetuate socioeconomic differences among college graduates and actually serve as a mechanism of demand-side exploitation. There's a number of other juicy ways that this happens that I touch on in the book, and we'll just very briefly mention them at the end of my discussion. Before I dive into what this passion principle is, let me say something very briefly about the many sources of data I use for this book. So I utilize in-depth interviews with 100 college students at 3 universities, including students at Stanford. I do follow-up interviews with about a third of those 2 to 5 years after they've left college. I also do interviews with career counselors and coaches to get their take on the passion principle. And then I conducted my own survey called the Passion Principle Survey. That's a proportionally representative survey, as well as drawing on nationally representative survey data. Let me begin with the interviews of students to get a sense of what cultural schemas or what cultural narratives are at the core of what are considered good career decision making. So I first turned to those student interviews and I asked students, what are the most important factors to you in good career decision making? Some of the students gave answers related to job security, that those things are important to good career decision making. Some students said that money was of primary importance in good career decision making. But what I found is that the majority of students articulated what I came to call the passion principle as the most important guiding principle in career decision making. Formally, I define the passion principle as a morally laden cultural schema that elevates self-expression and fulfillment as the central guiding principle in good career decision-making. This sense of passion has 3 interrelated components to it. One is an intellectual connection to the work, finding the work fascinating or intriguing or interesting. The second is an emotional connection, finding the work, having the work spark joy or love or happiness. And the third is a personal connection, a sense of biographical fit or match with one's unique sense of personhood. To give you a sense of what it sounded like when people articulated the passion principle, for example, an engineering major at Montana State explained, I think the best reason for choosing a career field would be curiosity and play. Whatever makes you want to think about things, poke and prod what you know. An anthropology major at University of Houston said, choose a career field because you love it. That's the short and long of it. And I think some people have this different idea in their heads, and it's probably because they haven't found what they love. They haven't found their passion, and that's very sad to me. When I say that the passion principle was the predominant guiding principle in how people and how these students thought about good career decision making, this is what I mean. So what I have on this slide here is a graph that represents the proportion of students in a variety of different demographic categories who gave passion-related reasons as the most important guiding principle in career decision-making. And there is some interesting variation here. However, in all of these groups, over 70% of students gave passion as the prominent guiding principle in good career decision-making. And although there were some students who emphasized things like financial consideration and employment opportunities, this paled in comparison to the proportion who gave passion-related reasons. In fact, many students articulated that money was a bad reason for making career decisions, saying things like money doesn't buy happiness and it might lead to a miserable life. For example, an economics major at Stanford said, I think money is not a good reason to pursue a career. You might find yourself questioning your existence or don't know yourself later in life. And really, I'd like to be able to go home every day and know I did something that I enjoy. I think money is kind of a really bad reason to pursue a career. 61% of the students I talked about explicitly said that money was a problematic reason for career decision-making, and many others said that job security was also problematic because it didn't foster opportunities for personal fulfillment. But the question comes up, though, do students really take these things into account in their own career decision-making? Is this just a romantic sense of what one should do? Or when it comes down to brass tacks, do students actually incorporate the schema into their career decisions? Although I found that students were slightly more likely to reference things like job security and salary when they talked about why they made their own decision of a college major, overwhelmingly, the majority of students emphasized passion-related considerations in why they chose the major that they chose, as well as the main factors in what they were considering after graduation. But I want to make it clear here that that money was important to students. It wasn't that they completely resisted the idea of financial considerations and employment opportunities, but those things had to come second after passion-related considerations were taken into account. And the majority of students offered a sense of an idea of an economic floor for a college major, a level of economic security below which they would be unlikely to fall whatever their academic major. In fact, half of the students I talked to gave only passion-related justification for why they chose the major that they chose and what they wanted to do after graduation, saying nothing unprompted about things like job security and salary. But why is the passion principle so compelling to these students? I find, first of all, it's important because students connected passion with success. Students believe that having passion for a field would mean that someone would inevitably work harder than someone who was simply motivated by money. But more importantly, the passion principle was so salient to students because they not only understood being in a field for which they have passion as part of a good job, but as key to a good life. Students expressed deep anxieties over what awaits them in the labor force and articulated in clear and often poignant terms their fears of being stuck in a job that they hate. And a mechanical engineering student from Montana State said, I guess the shortest answer is I get one life on this planet. And so far, most of it's been spent in classrooms, preparing me for a job. I'm going to go to work, to this cubicle or some meeting or boardroom or production floor. I'm going to go there for the rest of my life. And then maybe if I've been careful and lucky, I'll be able to retire for the last 4 years with bad hips and a bad heart and no hearing before I die. I mean, that's life. Now, if I'm going to play that game, I at least want something that isn't too dreadful for the next 50 years. For these students, choosing a self-expressive occupation was understood as highly rational because it was the only guiding principle for career decision-making that promised to insulate them from the drudgery they believed plagued workers in the labor force. But how common is the passion principle? Is this just a millennial phenomena, maybe something that's related just to this particular aspect of the career stage? If we look at the multi-million-dollar enterprise of advice books and workshops aimed at opening up space in our work for a sense of self-fulfillment, that might suggest to us that this isn't just a millennial generation phenomena. And in fact, when I interviewed career counselors and coaches, the majority of them parroted the passion principle as well. For example, a career coach explained, I would tell the people she coached, money does not buy happiness. Money is necessary for happiness, no question, but it's not sufficient. But it's not just these college students and not just these career counselors and coaches who emphasize the passion principle. Indeed, the passion principle is predominant as a guiding principle for career decision-making among the college-educated workforce in the US more generally. So I asked I asked a survey sample of college-educated workers what was most important to them if they were considering taking a new job. 46% of them said interest or passion for their work was the most important factor, compared to 21% who said salary was most important, and only 13% who said job security was most important. I also find that there's quite a bit of similarity of consistency in adherence to the passion principle across demographic groups. I do find that those from upper class families are more likely than those from working class families to be attached to the passion principle, and Asian and Black college educated workers are slightly less likely than white workers to be attached to the passion principle. But this is variation in a very narrow band of a sense of attachment to the passion principle. I also find very little variation by the field of employment. From the strongest attachment, those in the social sciences, to the weakest attachment, those in computers and IT, there's only about a 5 to 7% variability in attachment to the passion principle by field. So this is a sentiment that is widespread among college students as well as those with college education in the US workforce. But as a sociologist, I'm really concerned about issues of privilege and inequality that come out of a narrative like this. So for the rest of my talk, I'm going to pivot to two ways that I find that the passion principle can reinforce inequality. The first of those have to do with what happens to people who pursue their passion after college graduation. So what I find is that 85% of students that I followed up with after college had prioritized their passion when making decisions after college, and a full 60% had entered jobs or advanced degree programs that they said were aligned with their passion. But not all passion-related jobs or career paths are created equal. Only 40% had career paths that were both financially stable and aligned with their passion. What I found is that that many students who sought to pursue their passion encountered that pursuing passion came at a price. This included things like tolerating employment delays, waiting for months or even years for a job to come up that aligned with one's passion before stepping full on into the labor force, or even deprioritizing financial considerations when deciding between a job that was aligned with one's passion but wasn't paid very well, or a job that was stable and paid well but wasn't aligned with one's passion. As you might suspect, however, not all students are equally able to weather these costs of passion seeking. I found that there were strong class differences in who is able to launch into a job that's both in their passion and stable and decently paying. So what I have on this slide here is a two-dimensional axis that is the degree to which a field is in one's passion and the degree of precarity or stability of that particular job. And the most normatively ideal position are those in the top right. In one's passion, having stable labor market position and decently paying. The least normatively ideal position is that in the lower left, outside of one's passion in very precarious types of labor market position. And I found strong class alignment with who was in what quadrant. I found that half of wealthy career aspirants and about 45% of middle-class career aspirants were in that top right quadrant, compared to less than a quarter of working class respondents. And in contrast, only one of the wealthy students ended up in that bottom left quadrant. But why are there class differences in the ability to launch into stable passion-related paths? What I find is that there's two categories of resources that are particularly helpful to launch wealthy passion seekers into stable employment in their passion. The first are what are called safety nets. These include things like financial support from parents during college or after college, maybe helping them pay rent during an unpaid internship, for example, or the ability to live at home after college without putting a financial strain on their family members. So take, for example, the story of Brianna. Brianna is a newscaster from a wealthy family, and she explains, I love what I do, but it's hard sometimes. I'm 29 and still sometimes have to have help from my dad because this job doesn't pay as much. I'm almost 30 and I'm still not officially cutting that umbilical cord. I don't want to bug my dad, but I just don't have another choice. This support from her parents was critical in Brianna's ability to continue work that aligned with her passion. The second category of resources are what I call springboards. These are things like cultural capital, social connections, that are the ability to navigate the professional job search, for example, educational capital or social capital, maybe connections that one might have through their parents. So Claire, for example, is a graduate from University of Houston from an upper middle class family. And Claire works at a prestigious natural history museum and had a lot of cultural capital from her parents that then translated into social capital that developed as a result of her volunteering. Claire explained, well, my parents were both in a medical field. When I was a teenager, instead of taking summers off, my mom encouraged me to volunteer at the zoo, volunteer at the museum. I volunteered at both for 5 years until I was 18. As a result of her volunteering, Claire developed the social capital that allowed her to bypass the typical internship application process in the museum, and that then turned into a job that she currently has. She says, when we have our interns, they're like, oh, the application process was terrible. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I feel bad being like, I didn't actually apply for my job. They were just like, oh, here's a position open. Do you want it? I feel like it's been easy for me. I've been really lucky in my ability to get into the career I'm in now. But when low-income and first-generation career aspirants sought paths in their passion, they often encounter difficulties weathering the precarity of passion seeking without these kinds of springboards or safety nets. Consider the story of Thomas. So Thomas is a graduate from Montana State with a music degree and moved back to Minnesota to start his own private music lessons business. He had some initial success getting clients, but he couldn't get on top of his student loan payments fast enough with getting his clients, and ultimately had to give up on his passion, on his music lessons business, and find another job. Thomas said, I had high hopes for going into music education, but reality set in pretty quickly. Once my student loan kicked in, I actually went back to my college job, which was working in a warehouse through UPS. I'm kind of the first one in my family to ever go to school. Coming from a farming family, I'm not scared to work hard at all, but I don't have any family support. The system kind of ate me up and spit me out and took advantage of me. I have bitter feelings about all of that. There's that saying where I'll lift myself up with my bootstraps, but I didn't have any straps. It's so easy for a dude that's successful to look back and say, oh yeah, you just gotta work hard. I was making $11 an hour working in UPS warehouses. It's really hard. I'm so poor, I can't even put gas in my car to go look for another job. At the time of the interview, Thomas was working in a brewery, making about $30,000 a year, and still had over $60,000 in student loan debt. We might imagine that if Thomas had had the financial safety nets from his family and didn't have so much student loan debt, or had some social capital connections in the music industry in Minneapolis, he might have been able to succeed in getting his music lessons business, his passion, off the ground. Beyond these issues around individuals, students, and career aspirants' own decision-making, I'm also interested in this book in whether there might be a demand side to the passion principle. So in the interviews, I found curiously that career aspirants were quite willing to say that they would sacrifice for their passion. Sacrifice pay, free time, stability, job security, if they could have a job that they love. And they were able to do that and willing to do that because they wanted to avoid the drudgery they thought would otherwise afflict them in the paid workforce. But I wondered whether employers might benefit from this passion, might prefer this passion, and might even exploit this kind of passion among their employees. So I conducted a survey experiment where I designed 2 fictitious jobs that were fictitious but quite realistic. One is a youth program manager job at a community nonprofit, and the other is an accounting job in an IT firm. And I created different application materials for these 2 jobs. And those application materials varied only in a statement in the cover letter. One of the cover letters emphasized the applicant's passion for the job, and the other cover letters emphasized the person's interest in the job because they like the location, they like the salary, or they like the location. So here's the look of the job ads that I created. I created fictitious resumes that looked realistic. And then as I said, I wrote these cover letters and varied only a single sentence in the cover letter to emphasize passion, organization, salary, or location. And I was primarily interested in whether people who saw the passionate version of the application materials were more interested in hiring the person for the youth program manager job than if they saw other versions of the application material. And that is precisely what I found. So again, these are exactly the same application materials and vary only in a single sentence. And those who express the application materials that express passion for the work were significantly more likely to have people be interested in hiring them than those who emphasize company, location, and salary. Okay, this is the youth program manager position. We might suspect that passion is important here. What about the the accounting position in the IT firm? Again, here I found the same pattern, that those who saw the passionate version of the application materials were significantly more likely to be interested in hiring the applicant than those who saw the condition based on company, location, and salary. But why is the passionate version of the application materials preferred? What I found, first of all, is that people who saw the passionate applicant were more likely to say that they would be hard workers in the organization. But they were also more likely to say that they would be willing to take on additional responsibilities without an increase in pay. So they think they'll work hard, they think they'll shoulder more burden without asking for more. Are passionate applicants given a salary premium to entice them to work in the organization? The answer is, of course, no. That there was no salary bump given to the passionate applicants compared to those who articulated interest in the work for a different reason. So what this suggests is that potential employers are more interested in passionate applicants, in part because they see them as hardworking and willing to take on additional responsibilities without additional compensation, and there's no salary premium for passion. Passion expressed by applicants may thus signal to potential employers that they can extract more labor, or maybe better quality labor from their employees, without giving them additional compensation. In other words, there's a demand side to this passion principle. So as I noted, there's many other factors here in relationship to how the passion principle reproduces inequality. For example, in the book, I talk about how it can reinforce occupational gender segregation and race segregation. I talk about how it challenges the cultural legitimacy of using college as a tool for social mobility. And it does a couple of other things I want to note as well. One is I argue that the passion principle, what I call choice washes occupational inequalities, justifying them as simply patterns of individual passion seeking. So the passion principle, in other words, can provide this compelling choice-based justification of things like gender segregation and occupational inequality, and creating blockades for people's desires to do anything about them. And finally, I talk in the book about how the passion principle can perpetuate the ideal worker norm and cohorts of ideal workers. So with the career for which they have passion, many of these career aspirants expressed willingness to work long hours for less pay, sidestepping need to actually push for structural and organizational change to address things like overwork in the labor force. And in this way, the passion principle actually works in the service of capitalist needs, helping to produce cohorts of dedicated, hardworking ideal workers rather than challenging the ideal worker norm and overwork demands. I want to end my talk by a few implications of this work for educators, for students, and for workers. So what I found in this work is that the pursuit of passion is widely encouraged and widely sought after, but the consequences of doing so are not evenly distributed. This project has a lot to say to educational institutions. Although universities cannot fully make up for the differing access of their students to things like springboards and safety nets, they could certainly improve how they educate students about the white-collar labor force, could certainly reduce the amount of student loan debt that they perpetuate, and stem the tide of things like unpaid internships that advance the opportunities for the wealthy students at the expense of students who can't support themselves in that way. As educators, we need to think critically about the messages we give to students about things like major selection and career choice. Passion seeking may be the goal of some of our students, some of our mentees, but it's certainly not the goal of all of our students. To tisk undergraduates for their lack of willingness to switch to a major that they really love when they face pressure from parents, or to judge graduate students who leave our academic programs in search of more financially viable job opportunities, or maybe just job opportunities that don't require 70 or 80 hours a week, or to discount our colleagues who make room in their lives for things like families and hobbies, is to perpetuate these kinds of inequalities. For students and workers who do prioritize passion, we need to have frank discussions about how to shrink the footprint of work in our lives. If that is you, I encourage you to do something I call diversifying your meaning-making portfolio. By this, I mean cultivating opportunities for meaning-making and self-expression wholly outside the context of school and paid work, whether that's volunteering or painting or improv comedy. In the midst of this intensive training and work, I suspect we would all benefit from being reminded that there are many places beyond school and paid work for us to find self-expressive fulfillment. Regardless of our career goals, we should help our students, our mentees, and our colleagues understand the importance and power of collective efforts to address workforce issues, social movements and organizational change efforts that push back on overwork and 24/7 availability from our jobs. Quite simply, the paid workforce was not designed to support us in our search for self-expression and meaning. It is structured to utilize our labor for the benefits of the owners and stakeholders and stockholders for the organizations we work for. Ultimately, the passion principle is a powerful reminder of how seemingly inclusive, agentic cultural schemas can help to reinforce unequal social structures in the aggregate. And with that, I will pause and I welcome any questions that you might have.
Awesome. So thank you, Professor Cech, for that wonderful presentation. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is, inspired about the implications for this work. And so I will get things started with my own question, and then people can pose their own questions using the Q&A feature, and I'll then moderate by collecting any similar questions and then kind of asking them together. And so we should have, about a little over 20 minutes. So I'll take moderator privilege and ask my question while you think and write. And so I was curious, so in chapter 3, you talk about kind of this shifting relationship with money, that it seems like the passion principle is at work and it kind of minimizes the pursuit of financial gain, but that college students kind of then realize, they have some realizations once they get into the kind of the working world about like differences in salaries. And you talk a little bit about like the college floor. And I would love to hear a little bit about that. Like, what do you think is the consequences of like knowing what things cost and what different salaries are? Like, do you think that that would impact this at all, or do you think that the cultural schema is so strong that like that more knowledge about kind of costs and salaries might not impact that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. So when I first started hearing these narratives that I came to call the passion principle, I presumed that they were rooted in a naivete about how the labor market worked, that they didn't really understand how occupational inequality was structured, how wages were set, what it meant to make one's way through occupations, what sort of labor precarity was about. But the more that I looked at the transcript and asked follow-up questions of students, they really had a very good understanding. I mean, not a perfect understanding. Certainly, they're not economists, or most of them are not getting an economics degree, but they were able to articulate in sort of broad strokes that the labor market is increasingly precarious. And even if they got a well-paying job now, that doesn't mean that they would be able to keep that job. And they certainly had, examples of people they'd heard about who had, a 6 or 7 figure job and then lost it overnight and lost everything. And so for many students, there was a belief that that to have a college degree allowed a kind of economic floor, and that economic floor was pretty moderate. They didn't expect wealth and riches from that economic floor. They expected a sort of level of being comfortable or being able to access jobs that would provide a kind of economic comfort. But beyond that, we're not particularly naive about the sort of challenges, in part because they they saw precarity out there, and many of them didn't want to base their decision making on a inherently precarious labor market. And so many said, look, I know that things are unstable, so why would I prioritize job stability when I don't know what that's going to look like? I might as well just follow what I love, and if I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my job. The group of students who were a little bit more cued in and a little less likely to fall into that sort of economic floor sense were the wealthy students. Those were people who often had access to narratives about the labor market that had a little bit kind of deeper understanding of what it meant to have a certain kind of degree and how you could sort of leverage that to kind of move into fields that would provide a kind of well-off sort of salary and things. So it was very interesting to really get a sense of how students were talking about precarity and economic inequality.
Great. So I'll ask one of the questions that was asked and kind of combine it a little bit, which is, what could we do on the demand side in terms of the firms and organizations that are asking for their passionate employees? And are there any incentives for companies to change kind of that biased criteria?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get this a lot where people in organizations will say, well, of course I'm going to hire people who say that they're passionate. If they're going to give more to the organization, what is the problem with that? And I'll say that there's a few problems that actually have to do with bottom line issues. And this is referring to literature that has come out in the last decade in social psychology that suggests a couple of things. One is that when people have the opportunity for rest and creative activity outside of their work, they actually are more productive in the work that they do. They do their work more creatively and more productively in the space and time that they engage in their work. And there's also research that suggests that when we give people time off, they're more satisfied, they're less likely to become burnt out with their work. And so those things suggest that it's in the organization's best interest not to fully take advantage of the passion of their employees. But there's another issue that has to do with to what extent is the reliance on passion actually turning away people who are invested in their jobs for other reasons. So if the predominant narrative in an organization is you're here, you love it, we all love it, we're all passionate about this work, and there's somebody who's doing the job because maybe they want to advance in the organization, they want to advance their career, or maybe they have a relative who's having surgery and they need to help support that person financially, and they're motivated and invested to do good in their job, but not for passion reasons. If passion is the predominant narrative and there's an expectation that everybody is expressing passion for their work, that turns away and maybe turns off other investments, other motivations for doing well in their work. As an example, my sister works for an organization that shall remain nameless, and she was asked by a manager recently a series of questions that boiled down to what makes you passionate about this work, right? It wasn't, are you passionate, but what makes you passionate? And the very presumption that she was completely closed down the kinds of conversations she had about what else might be motivating her to do this work. And then the final thing I'll say along those lines is the ability to have access to jobs that even have the opportunity to spark a sense of excitement and fulfillment is a sense of privilege in and of itself. So people with a college degree are much more likely to have access to those kinds of jobs than those without a college degree. And it really does a disservice to demand, to expect that everyone in an organization promotes this sense that I am passionate about this work. Because it only perpetuates the kinds of disadvantages and sort of derogatory sentiments toward blue collar and service workers in many organizations.
Great, thank you. I think also when I'm also personally interested, but was asked in multiple variations, which what do we tell students? Like if we're, especially, college age students, high school students, as they're going through, what advice do we give them as they're going through that process? And we had a specific question about working learners as well.
Excellent. Okay, so this is a difficult thing. And I will say as an aside, Monique and I were talking about this before we went live, that this is something that I've struggled with myself, right? Because I came at this work through a sense of passion and I followed my passion into sociology and all of that. So this has been a journey, and I talk about this at length in the epilogue. But I would say that we have to make sure that we are not expecting a certain motivation from our students about why they're pursuing their career, being very careful about not to morally prioritize passion seeking and deprioritize money and job security as things that people are seeking, but also encourage our students, especially our graduate students, to make room in their schedule for things that they find meaningful and have get a sense of fulfillment for outside of graduate education. And then also more pragmatically to search out training in fields that are tangential to the field in which one is seeking, one is passionate about, to increase opportunities for skill building on the labor market. So for example, for sociology students taking maybe technical writing classes or accounting or big data classes, they might not be passionate about those things, but it sure may help them when they are looking in the labor force. So really having a broader scope of the various ways that students are approaching their career decision-making and being open to all approaches and not judging students on those bases.
Great. And there's a question that I think these two might be related, but if you want to answer them separately, that's okay, which is, do you think the passion principle would still hold in cultural contexts that are different from the US? And then there's also a question specifically about unions and how you would incorporate unions in thought. And I thought maybe those would be related for you, or maybe they're not.
Interesting. They might be, although that's something for a longer thought process than I will be able to do in my feet. So it's really interesting because I think that in post-industrial societies that emphasize a sense of individualism and have the kind of precarity that we have in the United States, I presume that some semblance of the passion principle probably is resonant there as well. I don't have any hard data to suggest this. I will say, though, that there has been a lot of interest in this work in cultural contexts that seem quite far afield from the US context. So it got a lot of play in the Brazilian context, in Portugal, in Belgium, in France, in the UK. It's being translated into Chinese. So there's all places where they have varying degrees of structural support for workers and assistance for workers who might be from sort of lower income families, right? Many of these places don't have the kind of crippling student loan debt that we often have here in the United States. But the thing that makes, I think, the passion principle, so the passion principle might be salient in many other kinds of cultural contexts, but the thing that makes it so pernicious in the context of the United States is the lack of social support networks we have for workers. So they are facing precarity. We have limited and shrinking welfare support, ability to access educational opportunities that don't strap them with a lot of student loan debt, and that's in contrast to other societies that might have more robust social safety nets. In terms of union, that's a really interesting question, and my sense is that that union activity can help to push back on the kind of overwork expectations that many people who are seeking passion are pushing back against. So one of the things that's so interesting about these narratives is passion seems like a good choice for career decision making because they recognize there is this expectation for overwork and work demand. And so they say, well, if I'm going to be working all these hours, I might as well be working in something that I like. And so union activity, other kind of collective bargaining efforts can help to tamp down on those overwork expectations and work devotion demands that people are responding to in part when they desire to seek their passion.
Excellent, thank you. And a question about, like, does pursuing a job based in passion actually impact happiness? Did you find that students, or I guess employees, were happier when they were in passion based work?
Oh, that's so interesting. So I don't have a direct measure of happiness. I do know that when people are engaged in work that they are passionate about, they have higher worker engagement, but there's no surprises there that if they have a personal connection to the work, they have a stronger sense of engagement with those tasks. There was certainly a cultural sentiment that being passionate about the work would lead to happiness. And the inverse of that was particularly interesting in that when people were in work that they thought that they were passionate about, but were unhappy about, that created really deep senses of dissatisfaction and actually sort of were personally destabilizing in certain ways. For example, one person I talked to was following their passion into something related to the medical field, was really excited about the job that they had, realized that they weren't passionate about their work anymore. And instead of leading them to question the work and question whether the work was something they should be in, it came to be a question about who they were themselves. And so it came to be a sense of existential crisis of who am I, what am I meant to do? And that was really difficult for a lot of people to kind of manage. And that is not a direct answer to your question anyway, other than it's sort of an interesting aside that has to do with happiness.
Great. This is a question that was about to what extent has passion become a substitute for competence, both in the minds of employers and workers? I thought that was a really interesting question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's in the experimental work, it certainly suggests that passion is an indication of competence, or at least an indication that people are going to be willing to work hard enough to get up to the level of competence that is needed. I asked students when I interviewed them directly about whether skill or passion was the most important. And most students gave boundary conditions on skill, right? They said, not everybody can be an Olympic swimmer, but for the most part, they believe that if somebody was passionate enough about something, that they can gain this skill that is necessary. And that is problematic for a whole host of ways. One of them being this sort of choice washing issue, that it just presumes that everything is meritocratic, and as long as you have the passion, you'll put in the work and get the skill and be able to succeed. But I think that there is a sense where the lack of passion can be taken as a question of people's competence. And I don't study this in the context of higher education, but I think it's there really perniciously in that, especially in graduate education, in graduate school applications, when people are expressing their interest in being a part of the program, they almost inevitably spin stories of passion. I am passionate about this work. And the lack of that passion narrative, I think often leads people to question whether they're competent or not. And I think in the context of people who are already embedded in graduate education programs, graduate students, for graduate students to admit to their faculty advisors that they're not passionate about their work would probably lead those faculty to question their competence, right? Or at least their ability to be successful in the field. And that kind of conflation, however it happens and whatever the mechanisms are, I think are really troubling.
Great. And I thought there was a question, and I wouldn't mind you reiterating this part from the book, especially about, in addition to exacerbating class differences, how did you find that the passion principle drives inequalities among other identifiers? So like specifically like women, and or is it mostly class?
Yes, excellent. Thank you for teeing this up, Monique. As I was halfway through my talk, I realized that I didn't actually explicitly articulate the way that this connects to gender inequality, which is a little funny considering this is a Clayman Institute talk. But nonetheless, this gender was a strong thread throughout the book, I promise, in part because it's really sort of about inequality writ large. So one of the ways that the passion principle reinforces gender inequality is by perpetuating this norm that our passion is attached to our senses of self, that we are to seek the things that we're passionate about, in part by figuring out who we are and finding the field that best expresses those things. But selves are social constructs. They're deeply gendered constructs. So who we think we are and what we think we're passionate about is often quite gendered. And so when we go finding things that express that, we tend to do so in ways that reinforce occupational gender segregation. But the thing that makes this really problematic, and this is part of that issue around choice washing that I mentioned briefly, is that when we see people making decisions along their passion and they make gendered decisions along these lines, we justify them as individual choices of following their passion. It sort of evaporates the genderedness of those decisions in the first place, and it makes it seem as though it aligns with meritocratic norms of career decision making and career opportunities. And so it becomes difficult for someone to look at this kind of passion-based career decision making and see that it's based in a gendered process, even though it very clearly reproduces occupational gender segregation.
And just kind of an additional gender question, which is, how many of your students and like career aspirants were kind of identified along the binary, and were you able to make any kind of extrapolations on people who did not identify in the gender binary?
Great question. There was one person who identified as trans. There was nobody who identified as gender non-binary in the interview sample that I had. And I did some analyses, sort of supplemental analyses for the book, and didn't find any significant results among gender non-binary persons and their relationship to the passion principle when I use the survey data. And so I'm not sure, I don't have any kind of hypotheses kicking around about how there might be differences along those lines. But that would be a really interesting thing to study, I think.
And how did you decide to start your research and write this book?
I started in when I was at Clayman, and ironically, so my dissertation was on occupational gender segregation. And so I was interested in what I call the self-expressive edge of occupational sex segregation, sort of sentiment I just talked about, where when people have a sense of self that's aligned with gender normative senses of masculinity and femininity, they tend to choose occupational paths that are more women dominated and men dominated respectively, even if they consider themselves feminists, even if they consider themselves sort of aligned with non-traditional gender norms. And so as a follow-up to that dissertation work, which was quantitative, I started doing interviews with Stanford students. And I did interviews with people identified as men and women, and I kept hearing this passion principle narrative over and over again. And I thought it's really interesting because although men and women are saying they're passionate about different things, they're giving a similar narrative about what passion means to them and how they're centering passion. And so that led me to think about, how do I structure a project around passion? And Stanford students are Stanford students, and they're not like students at other four-year institutions. And so I selected Montana State University and University of Houston as other case sites to do this work. Became clear very quickly that I wanted to have some survey data of college-educated workers in the United States as well, and that led on to that, and it just sort of snowballed from there until I realized that I actually just needed to sort of stop collecting data and do this work. I will say a quick note that I forgot to mention. This book was actually written and finished in very early 2020. I had conducted the Passion Principle survey in 2018 and had written everything up and was ready to go But then the pandemic hit, and I was concerned that the changing relationship to the paid labor force would mean that the passion principle would be fundamentally altered. So I told my editor to stop, and I refielded the passion principle survey in its entirety in October of 2020 and found very, very similar patterns, to the point that I had to do very little rewriting of the book. So this thing is really really deeply embedded, and is apparently sort of surviving and even thriving in the context of a global pandemic.
Yeah, that was great to hear kind of about the arc. So we're coming up at 5 o'clock. So I wanted to say thank you for all of the questions from all of the attendees. Thank you to Dr. Cech for sharing with us your kind of book overview and then all of these questions. This has been a really wonderful experience. And I hope that we all are able to go read that book in more thorough detail, as I just did, and highly recommend that you do. Definitely take a look at the epilogue. I also that you have a new book that just came out, Misconceiving Merit, which I'm looking forward to as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Kleinman folks for having me. This is an absolute privilege and pleasure.
Thank you.